everybody. Welcome to the R Plus Canine Podcast. I am your host today, Connie Moss. Today we are talking about probably a pretty controversial topic, retractable leashes. Retractable leashes, such a scary thing to talk about. Everybody has a very strong opinion about these pieces of equipment. So, okay, what is a retractable leash? It is, of course, if you don't know, it is the leash that you can attach it to your dog. It has a handle. Your dog can walk out probably about 12, 15, 20 feet out. And as the distance between you and your dog closes, when the dog comes closer to you, it retracts automatically. They usually have a brake button on them. They are super controversial because there have been so many accidents with these things. So many horrible things have gone wrong. Burns on people's legs from getting tangled in them, and dogs getting into fights or getting tangled together and having a fight. So many scary things can happen with these leashes. I think as dog trainers and as veterinarians, we've done a really good job getting the message out just how dangerous this piece of equipment can be. And yes, it is. But I challenge you, if you hate this equipment, to open your mind for just a moment and think about some of these points. Everything comes with risk, right? Everything we do comes with risk. So let's say dog sports. They come with a risk of injury or chronic injuries for your dogs. All sports. Let's talk about just agility, right? There's so many things that can happen to your dog. Hiking with your dog, there is the risk that you will run into an off-leash dog on the trail, and that could be a fight or an injury or, God forbid, anything worse. Driving to work, that comes with inherent risk. You could get into an automobile accident and possibly death. A dog training class is a risk. There are inherent risks taking a dog training class. If it isn't a well-run class, there could be the risk of the instructor losing control of the class and a dog fight happening, or dogs getting too close to each other and snipping at each other and going after each other, and that could create reactivity in one of those dogs if they are particularly sensitive or going through a sensitive period of development. So yeah, risks are everywhere. Everything you do has a risk associated with it. But you can reduce risk. So taking our examples, dog sports, for example, you can reduce the risk of injury by warming up your dog, doing less reps, shorter training periods, less intensity. So you can control or mitigate some of that risk. Let's take hiking. You can go hiking with your dog. You love to go hiking. Your dog loves to go hiking. You can reduce the risk of running into off-leash dogs and having a fight or having even some snippy little moments that create reactivity in your dog by having your dog on leash or under control and carrying maybe citronella spray so that you can ward that other dog off just long enough for that owner to get control, hopefully, of their dog. Driving to work, you can reduce your risk of injury or death by wearing a seatbelt. Taking a dog training class, you can reduce the risk of a dog fight in a class by only using a dog class that is very well run by experienced professional instructors who know what they're doing. They can mitigate the risks by running a well-run class. So you can reduce risk. But then there's this big thing. This is the area where I live, where my brain is living when I'm thinking about using retractable leashes. It's the risk assessment. What is the risk compared to the gains? So with a retractable leash, I'm going to weigh the risks and the benefits here. I would argue that the retractable does offer a greater deal of freedom for many dogs. All dogs are going to love that. That's enriching for all dogs. There are some breeds, I would argue, that it's even more vitally important for. Dogs that are extremely active, for example. Let's take a German short-hair pointer. I'm not picking on them. I love them, but they're pretty active dogs, right? So that dog is going to probably walk 3-4 times more distance than you will on a walk if they're on a retractable, because they're walking out, they're walking back to you, they're walking over here, they're sniffing over there, they're moving all around you while you're just walking in a straight line. So there is a lot of exercise to be gained. The enrichment is also the dog gets to sniff things and pee on things that they might otherwise not get to do because they're on a 6-foot leash. So there are definite pros to having that retractable in your arsenal of tools. But you have to evaluate the risks and the rewards, and I evaluate for every single situation. So this goes over to, and if you've worked with me and you've worked on a retractable leash, I do sometimes give lessons, believe it or not. You know these rules. I would have given these rules to you and I would have brought them up to you over and over again, because you can actually reduce retractable leash risks. Just like you can with agility and hiking and driving and dog training classes, you can reduce the risk by using some rules that I personally have in place for using them. So before we get to the rules, let's talk about the risks of retractables. Right? We all know these risks really well because, as I said earlier, trainers and vets have done a great job getting the message out there. I fear sometimes when we give this message, how dangerous this is, I fear that people sometimes throw out the baby with the bathwater because they think, oh, they're just so dangerous, there's no place in anyone's life for this piece of equipment. And I would argue that that's a bit of a harsh judgment, and it's a bit of a all-encompassing judgment, and the area is actually much more gray, I think, which is why I live in that gray space of reevaluation all the time about whether or not it's a good piece of equipment to use. So back to risks. Risks for these retractables. Yeah, they give you more distance. They give your dog more distance away from you, but more distance equals stronger force if your dog pulls or lunges suddenly, which is, of course, going to either pull you over or you're going to accidentally get that retractable handle ripped right out of your hand. Yes, there is a risk of tangling. We all see the pictures on social media of rope burns from people's retractable leashes on their legs and arms and on their dogs. So yes, there is definitely a risk of being tangled and burned by the rope or the line on the retractable. I would say at this point, I like the tape version of the retractables, not the corded version. They come in 2 versions, the lines do. The cords are fine if you have a really small dog, like 10 pounds or under, because there's not going to be a lot of force on that cord. But if you have a larger dog or a high energy dog, big no on the cord, because it's just a bigger recipe for disaster of burning yourself or burning your dog, getting it tangled. It's going to hurt a lot more than the tape will. Don't get me wrong, they can both hurt you, but I think the tape is much better. So that's another example of reducing risk is tape versus cord. Equipment malfunction, that's another risk with this stuff. If you don't buy good quality equipment, then you're risking a badly produced product that's going to fail, particularly the brake, or the thing's just going to fall apart or not retract when you need it to. Confusion on the operation of the equipment, that's huge, and that's why I recommend taking classes or learning it very slowly before you use it in the real world, because things are going to happen. Things are going to come up and surprise you, and when they do, sometimes people are momentarily startled, and you suddenly forget how to operate that piece of equipment. Oh, the brake, the static brake or the permanent brake, you forget. So they are a little tricky sometimes, so you need to practice the equipment. Also, the element of surprise in general. Dogs, cats, wildlife, like I mentioned, maybe cars are coming up behind you and you don't notice these things until the last second. Those elements of surprise will be an issue. Your dog will chase stuff. They're going to happen if you're living and using this in the real world. The last risk is the dropped handle. That can really scare a dog. Those handles drop, and they're big handles. When they hit the ground, they make a noise, and then because it's retractable, it's now retracting towards your dog. And if your dog's a little sensitive, it's going to freak them out because suddenly this scary piece of plastic is charging right at your dog and it's making a lot of noise if it's dragging over concrete or gravel. And that could cause your dog to run away. Now you're really in trouble. So those are the risks of using a retractable leash. Now, let's get into my rules, which will help to reduce the risk of using these pieces of equipment. So one of my rules is always use high quality equipment. Do not go cheap on the retractables. I personally like the Flexi leashes. I think they're a pretty nice quality product. But I think these days there are a lot of new products coming on the market that are also better. I think you need to shop around, look at reviews, ask people who use Flexis what they use and if they've ever had issues with them. So use high quality equipment. Know how to operate this equipment. That's really important. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're panicked or startled for just a second, you will temporarily forget how to operate that equipment. So you need to be very comfortable with it. Practice using it. Attach it to a chair in your dining room. Just run the line around a chair and clip it to itself. And then just practice pulling and retracting, braking, the static, the sudden brake, and then using the long-term brake, the lock button. So practice using them quickly, kind of like a quick draw when you're using a gun. Practice the quick draw. Another rule I have that I think is vitally important is dog training. This is big for me. Dog training, your dog needs to know how to walk on a leash a little bit, and they need to have a recall. Those are my rules. You can make up your own rules, but if your dog can't recall, if your dog can't walk on a leash at all, then no, I don't think you should be using the retractable leash at all. It is not a replacement for dog training and for recall. Despite anything you read out there, I just found a news article on the internet from a CBS News story about retractable leashes. And right there in the story, in mainstream media, they're saying, oh, it's a great alternative to walking a dog that has no recall, that doesn't come to you when called. I would argue that point all the way to the end. That's a hill I will die on. No, if your dog doesn't have a recall, don't use it. Another rule for me is only in open spaces. You need to be in a fairly level piece of ground. You need to be able to see very well all around you because you need to see the environment. You need to know when a distraction is coming so that you can prepare, so that you're reducing the risk of being startled and not operating your equipment correctly. And lastly, you need to be aware of your surroundings. That kind of goes in with using it in big spaces. You need to be able to see all around you. You need to be able to listen. Don't have ear pods on when you're walking your dog on a retractable. You need to be able to hear if a car is coming behind you. If you're in a big, quiet neighborhood, maybe there's nothing happening, and you're walking in the middle of the day when it's really quiet, I think that might be an okay place to do it based on my other rules, but you need to still be paying attention. You need to be vigilant. Listen for cars behind you. Listen for dogs that might be running up off leash. You have to pay attention. Look around. Be aware. And actually, I said that was my last rule. I do have one more rule. This is a more recent rule. You need to train for drops. That means sooner or later, you're human, you're going to drop the handle of the retractable leash. And when that happens, like I mentioned, if your dog is sensitive, they're going to take off because it's going to be chasing your dog. So you need to train for that up front. Practice training where the handle is dragging as your dog is moving away and you're giving treats for it. Those are my rules about using a retractable leash. I would say you also need to practice in general. This is not my rule, but if you're going to use a retractable leash, you need to practice. Don't just run out into the world willy-nilly and go all over the place with a retractable leash. You need to practice first. Even if you meet all the rules I just talked about, practice using it. Get your dog comfortable with it. It's not just practice for you, it's practice for your dog. Your dog needs to get comfortable with how much length the dog has available to use. Are you using the 16-foot, the 20-foot, or the 21-foot? I think they come in 21, 16, and I think there's even a 10-foot or a 12-foot line. So your dog needs to be comfortable with how much space they have. Because yes, dogs will go charging out thinking they're off leash, and then they're going to clothesline themselves when they get to the end. So you really have to work in a smaller space and get comfortable slowly instead of just taking this out into the world and letting your dog clothesline himself or running into other trouble. That would go with don't practice around distractions. Get comfortable in your yard or in your driveway or right in front of your house before you take it anywhere. And one big argument I hear against retractables is that it teaches your dog to pull on leash. I don't know, you guys. I don't really buy that. I don't think that's the case. Because if it was, think about all the dogs that know how to do tracking, for example. If you're tracking your dog, it doesn't mean you've taught your dog to pull on a leash, because tracking dogs do pull you down the track. The leash is tight, but when that dog walks on a leash, they can still learn to walk appropriately. Dogs who pull you on a scooter or a bike or when you're on cross-country skis, they know how to pull when they're doing that activity. But those dogs can also walk on a leash if they were taught the difference. So you can teach the difference. It is possible, and it's not hard. So for me, with my clients, I teach them verbal cues. We teach the dog a verbal cue, go sniff, which means you have the full length of the retractable leash to go and sniff and check things out. And when I need my dog by my side and I have my leash locked down, so maybe I've only given my dog 5 feet and it's locked at 5 feet, I will then tell my dog, with me, and that means you're walking with me now, you don't have the full length of the leash. And I would say when you're practicing, you should be practicing using both of those. Go sniff, with me, a lot, so your dog understands the difference. And while you're out practicing, you should be doing recalls constantly. Practice calling your dog to you when there are no distractions. So when you're practicing in your driveway, in your front yard, just walk around aimlessly, let your dog check things out, and then practice come and big rewards. You need to amp up those rewards because you're going to be challenged. Your dog will be challenged with a lot of distractions down the road, and you want to make sure you get a lot of good, strong reinforcement history on recalls. So at this point, though, your dog should have a recall, and you are now adding that recall to the retractable leash. So in short, yes, I like retractable leashes under certain situations. Yes, retractable leashes have a place in dogs' lives, especially for enrichment and especially for particular breeds. No, retractable leashes do not replace training, and they do not replace a recall on your dog. No, it doesn't replace you being vigilant. You need to be vigilant even more when you're using a retractable leash. You can't be listening to music or a podcast while you're out walking your dog. You need to pay attention. Even if you're not on a road, you need to pay attention because there could be wildlife close by. And no, it's not for everyone. If you are an easily distractible person, this is not for you. If your reflexes are a little slow or a little challenged, this might not be the right product for you. It's not a personal thing. It's just a matter of safety and reducing risk. Know your risks, know what you're capable of, and understand what your dog is capable of. All right. So let's hear it. I'm sure there's a lot of feedback about retractable leashes. Let me know what you think. And please listen along to our other podcasts at R+K9. Happy training out there.